If you were asked to name one president who has had the greatest impact on the United States over the past 50 years, some people would say Ronald Reagan, others would say Barack Obama. But for many people, the first name that would come to mind is probably Donald Trump. Some call him one of the most successful presidents in American history. Others consider him one of the most controversial. Some see him as an American hero. Others believe he fundamentally changed the rules of American politics. He says things other people would never dare to say. He does things other people would never dare to do. When criticized, he rarely stays silent. When defeated, he almost never admits that he has lost. And when a rule stands in his way, his first instinct is usually not to accept it, but to move one step closer and see whether that rule is really strong enough to stop him. But very few people know that the man who would later shake the entire United States and influence the course of world affairs once caused his own father to develop a serious fear when he was only 13 years old. If this boy keeps going like this, he may destroy himself. So his father made an almost ruthless decision. He sent him away from home. He sent him to a strict military school. Today, we are not going to talk about President Trump. We are not going to talk about Trump the real estate tycoon. We are going to focus on one question. What really happened to Donald Trump when he was 13 years old? And why did the boy his father sent to military school fail to become quiet and obedient? Why did he instead grow, step by step, into the Donald Trump we know today, a man who seems almost incapable of bowing his head? Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York. He was the fourth of 5 children born to Fred Trump and Mary Ann Trump. Trump's mother, Mary Ann, was born in Scotland and later immigrated to the United States. His father, Fred, was born in New York and became a real estate developer. During Donald's childhood, the family lived in Jamaica Estates, an affluent neighborhood in Queens. This was not a poor family. It was not even an ordinary middle-class family. By the time Donald was born, his father's business was already substantial. The family lived in a large house, had domestic help, and a driver, and the children grew up knowing that their lives were different from those of many families around them. But wealth did not make the Trump household relaxed. The central figure in the family was Fred Trump. In New York real estate, Fred was not the loudest man in the room. He was not the kind of developer who covered Manhattan with his own name. His business focused mainly on residential housing, buying land, securing loans, managing construction, renting apartments, collecting payments. Every step had to be calculated. One unnecessary expense reduced profit. One delayed project increased interest costs. One small problem left unresolved could eventually become a serious financial hole. Fred valued control above almost everything else. Control over costs, control over risks, control over employees, control over projects, and at home, control over his family. In Fred's view, a child could be strong, a child could be ambitious, but a child could not be undisciplined. A child could fight to come in first, but could not allow emotion to destroy the result. A child could challenge competitors, but could not openly disregard his father's authority, and Donald was becoming the most difficult child in the family to control. Fred and Mary Ann Trump had 5 children. Their eldest daughter, Mary Ann, later became a federal judge. Their eldest son, Fred Trump Jr., known within the family as Freddie, was next. Their third child was Elizabeth, who later worked in banking. Donald was 4th. The youngest was Robert. The 5 children had the same parents, but they were very different from one another. In a traditional family, Freddie, as the eldest son, might naturally have been expected to inherit the family business. His father built real estate. The eldest son would carry it forward. The path seemed obvious, but Freddie was not the son Fred had imagined. He had a softer personality and did not show the same aggressive obsessive interest in real estate that Donald later developed, he eventually chose to become an airline pilot. Today, most people would consider that a respected, professional, and even glamorous career, but Fred may not have seen it that way. For Fred, success was not simply having a good job. It meant entering the family business, continuing his path, proving that you were strong enough to carry the empire forward. Freddie later struggled with alcohol and died in 1981 at the age of 42. Donald Trump has repeatedly said that his brother's experience was one of the main reasons he never drank alcohol or smoked. But in 1959, that tragedy had not yet happened. At that time, Fred was looking at two very different sons. One son did not want to follow the path he had laid out. The other showed remarkable competitiveness, aggression, and a desire to control. One seemed too soft. The other seemed too hard. One did not want to fight for the world his father had created. The other might one day want to surpass even the father himself. That gave Donald a very unusual position within the family. He may not have been the easiest child, but he may have been the child Fred believed had the greatest potential, and he may not have been the child Fred treated most gently. Perhaps precisely because Fred saw himself in Donald, he demanded more from him than from the others. That is where the relationship between father and son became dangerous. The father admired the boy's toughness, but also feared that one day the same toughness might escape his control. Years later, many people explained Trump's military school years with a single sentence: he was too mischievous as a child. That is not entirely wrong, but it does not reach the heart of the matter. Ordinary mischief means talking during class, failing to turn in homework, or occasionally fighting with classmates. What Donald displayed may have been more complicated. He liked creating a disturbance. He liked attracting attention. He liked testing people. Most of all, he liked discovering what would happen after he crossed a line. Trump later wrote in The Art of the Deal that when he was in second grade, he hit his music teacher because he believed the teacher did not understand music. He presented the episode as an early example of his willingness to express his opinions forcefully. Of course, this was Trump's own recollection many years later, and the details are difficult to independently verify, but it still tells us something important. In the childhood image Trump chose to create for himself, fighting back was not a source of shame, it was evidence of character. He also later wrote something even more revealing: I like to stir things up, and I like to test people. That sentence comes much closer to the real issue than the word mischievous. What does it mean to test people? It means that when a teacher says, "You are not allowed to do that," you want to know how serious that warning really is. When a father draws a boundary, you want to know what will happen if you cross it. When a classmate refuses to back down, you study whether that classmate is genuinely strong or merely pretending. This is an unusually early awareness of power. The question is not only what is right or wrong, the question is who is really in charge, who will retreat first, who has the power to punish me, and can I force that person to back down? When people observe Trump's later business and political style, they often see a similar pattern. In negotiations, he frequently begins with a demand far beyond what others expect. When criticized, he rarely begins by calmly explaining himself. He often attacks the person criticizing him. When faced with institutional limits, he tends to push toward the edge and watch whether the other side truly has the courage to stop him. We cannot say that a 13-year-old child already possessed a complete political or business strategy, but the instinct may already have existed. Never accept the boundary someone else gives you without testing it first. Move forward, touch the wall, find out whether it is made of stone or only paper. Young Donald lived in Queens. There were comfortable homes, stable neighborhoods, and the family order created by his father, but not far away stood Manhattan, which represented an entirely different world. Skyscrapers, luxury hotels, wealth, celebrities, media, power. Fred Trump's business was largely built around residential developments in the outer boroughs, but Manhattan represented a brighter and more dramatic stage. Biographies and published reports have said that young Donald traveled into Manhattan with friends without permission and became interested in switchblades and similar objects. One widely repeated version of the story says that when Fred discovered the knife, he concluded that his son needed a radical change and removed him from his original school, sending him to the New York Military Academy. The knife story comes from later biographies and family recollections. It cannot be proven to have been the only trigger, but it remains one of the most specific clues in the story. Imagine what Fred may have seen when he discovered those objects. It may not have been the knives themselves that frightened him most. Knives could be confiscated, a secret trip could be punished, a conflict with a teacher could be handled. But when all these incidents were placed side by side, they no longer looked like isolated mistakes. They looked like a pattern. The boy was becoming less afraid of consequences. He was becoming more willing to cross boundaries, and when confronted, he may not have responded by lowering his head and apologizing. Published accounts have suggested that when Fred confronted him about the knives, Donald did not immediately confess. He continued to insist that he was innocent. That may have been what truly alarmed his father. Making a mistake is not necessarily frightening. If a child makes a mistake and becomes afraid afterward, the parent can still control him through punishment. But if the child's first response is not fear, but argument, denial, counterattack, or an attempt to shift responsibility back onto the accuser, then ordinary parenting may no longer be enough. Fred may have realized that Donald had inherited his toughness, but not yet his calculation. He was willing to take risks, but did not yet know when to stop. He wanted to win, but had not yet learned how to delay gratification for a larger result. He was highly sensitive to power, but had not yet faced an authority he could not get around. This boy did not lack ability. His ability, ambition, and impulsiveness were growing at the same time. If allowed to continue unchecked, he might one day become an unusually powerful man. But before becoming powerful, he might also destroy himself. Fred had many options. He could have sent Donald to another private school. He could have hired tutors. He could have increased discipline at home. He could have used his connections to negotiate with Donald's original school, but he chose none of these softer solutions. In 1959, 13-year-old Donald entered the New York Military Academy and began life at a military boarding school. Public accounts generally agree that his parents hoped the school's discipline would control his behavior. But why military school? Because Fred did not merely need another teacher, he needed a system that could control Donald around the clock, even when Fred himself was not there. At an ordinary school, Donald was still Fred Trump's son. Teachers knew the family. The school knew who his father was. His father's money and status created an invisible layer of protection around the boy. At military school, family identity could not make his bed. His father's money could not polish his shoes. The bugle would not sound 30 minutes later because he had slept badly. An officer would not debate every order with a 13-year-old boy. Wake up, form ranks, make the bed, bed, drill, attend class, submit to inspection, obey. Everything had a schedule. Everything had a standard. Everything had a rank. Fred wanted his son to understand that there were forms of authority in the world that would not retreat because he argued, became angry, or had a wealthy father. But there may have been another reason Fred chose military school. He may not have wanted to turn his son into a gentle, passive child. In Fred's value system, gentleness was not necessarily a virtue. He wanted to preserve Donald's ambition, courage, and competitiveness. He simply wanted to install a steering wheel. Military school was a very unusual solution because it restricted freedom while encouraging competition. It demanded obedience, but also offered promotion. It forced younger cadets to accept orders, but rewarded successful students with rank, insignia, and the authority to command others. It did not tell Donald, "You must not be powerful." Its deeper lesson was, you must first learn how to survive inside the system before you can become powerful within it. There is another person in this story who is often overlooked. Trump's mother, Mary Ann. She was born in Scotland and immigrated to the United States as a young woman. Compared with Fred's hard, practical business image, Mary Ann was publicly described as quieter, more focused on family, religion, and ceremony. If Fred represented pressure, competition, and results, Mary Ann may have represented comfort and emotional safety within the household. For 13-year-old Donald, being sent to military school did not merely mean changing schools. It meant leaving home, leaving his familiar bedroom, leaving his mother's care, leaving the environment where, even under a strict father, he still possessed a special family status. Did Mary Ann oppose the decision? Did she ask Fred to give the boy one more chance? Did she believe that 13 was too young to be sent away? The public record does not preserve that family discussion. But the outcome tells us that on major decisions about the children, Fred had the final authority. We can imagine a plausible version of the conflict. The mother saw a child who was about to be sent away. The father saw a son who required immediate correction. The mother worried that he would suffer. The father worried that if he did not suffer now, he might pay a far greater price later. In 1950s America, many fathers believed that boys had to learn toughness early. They should not openly show fear. They should not become too dependent on protection. They should not use emotion to escape responsibility. From that perspective, military academy was not only a punishment. To Fred, it may have been a furnace. He would place his son inside it and see whether the boy would be broken or hardened into steel. In the autumn of 1959, Donald arrived at the New York Military Academy. We do not know exactly what he said on the day he left home. We do not know whether he felt afraid during the journey, but based on the personality he displayed throughout his later life, he probably would not have wanted his father to see weakness. To admit fear would mean admitting that his father's decision had struck him, and Donald may already have hated being placed in the position of the loser. So even if he felt anxious, he may have tried to reinterpret being sent away as a different kind of story. My father is not getting rid of me. I am going to face a greater challenge. I have not failed at home. I am going somewhere else to prove myself. That is an important ability. Later in life, people would repeatedly see that Trump rarely allowed others to define an event for him. A business setback became a clever restructuring. An attack became proof that his enemies feared him. A legal or political crisis became evidence that he was being unfairly targeted but continued to fight. He did not merely experience events, he renamed them. As long as he controlled the explanation, he did not believe he had truly lost. Perhaps that instinct was already protecting him on the day he left home at 13. When Donald entered the academy, he did not enter a world more affectionate than the one he had left. He entered a more direct and much harder power structure. The uniform had to be perfect. The bed had to meet inspection standards. Orders from officers and senior cadets had to be followed. At home, he was the son of a wealthy real estate developer. At the academy, he was simply a junior cadet. No one would hand him status merely because his surname was Trump. But Donald may have quickly discovered that the military academy, though strict, was not impossible to understand. Its rules were clear. There were superiors. There were subordinates. Some people issued orders. Other people followed them. Good performance could lead to promotion. Rank gave a student the right to manage others. This was a more open hierarchy than an ordinary school, and hierarchy was not unfamiliar to Donald. His father's company had an owner, managers, laborers, and tenants. His home had a dominant father and children occupying different positions. Military school simply placed that logic in uniforms and displayed it on shoulders and insignia. Donald may have realized quickly that he did not have to remain at the bottom forever. If he mastered the rules, he could rise. If he won the approval of the instructors, he could gain rank. If he proved himself stronger than the others, he could move from receiving orders to giving them. That was the unexpected effect of military school. Fred had intended to restrain his son's aggression, but the academy gave that aggression a new outlet. Before military school, Donald gained attention by creating trouble. At military school, he could gain attention through competition, rank, uniforms, and leadership. Before military school, he challenged teachers to prove that they could not control him. At military school, he could control others and prove that he possessed authority. One important figure in Trump's military school years was Theodore Dobius, an instructor and athletic coach. Former cadets remembered Dobius as extremely tough and deeply committed to discipline. PBS reporting on Trump's academy years also described a culture shaped by strict control, hierarchy, and bullying. This type of instructor was different from the ordinary teachers Donald had known before. Dobius would not excuse poor discipline because Donald was intelligent. He would not lower standards because Donald's father was wealthy. When facing someone like that, young Trump had two choices. He could continue fighting every order until the academy expelled him, or he could temporarily accept the system, study it, and discover how to gain power within it. He chose the second path. This may have been one of the most important transformations of his early life. He did not abandon his desire for power because he was obeying. Instead, he may have learned that temporary obedience did not necessarily mean defeat. If obedience today could lead to promotion tomorrow, then obedience itself could become a transaction. Today, others command me. Tomorrow, after I gain rank, I will command more people. That logic would appear again and again in Trump's later life. He could temporarily cooperate with someone. He could temporarily accept a political alliance. He could praise a former opponent when the relationship became useful. But every relationship eventually came down to one question: does this help me move toward a higher position? Trump later participated in athletics at the academy and eventually held cadet leadership positions. Former classmates did not all remember him in the same way. Some remembered him as forceful and fond of issuing orders. Some said he cared intensely about discipline and appearance. Others remembered that he could be helpful to people he accepted. Sandy McIntosh, who attended the academy with Trump, later recalled that Trump had treated him kindly and helped him during difficult situations. These conflicting memories do not necessarily contradict one another. They may reveal an essential structure in Trump's personality. He may not have treated everyone the same. Toward those who challenged his status, he could be extremely aggressive. Toward those who accepted him, joined his circle, or recognized his authority, he could be protective, helpful, and generous. In his world, people could easily fall into two categories: his people and his opponents. His people owed loyalty. His opponents had to be defeated, and when someone left his side, he might not see it as a normal disagreement. He might see it as betrayal. People watching Trump's political relationships today can still see this pattern clearly. Those who remain loyal often receive public praise. Those who oppose him are attacked, and those who once supported him but later criticize him often receive the most intense response. Military school was not the sole source of this pattern, but it gave ideas like loyalty, hierarchy, enemies, and leadership a very early training ground. On the surface, Fred's plan succeeded. His son was not expelled. He adapted to discipline. He became physically stronger. He learned to maintain order. He participated in sports. He gained leadership positions over other cadets. The boy who had created trouble in an ordinary school learned to survive and gain status inside a strict institution. When Fred saw him again, Donald probably did not say, "I was afraid." He probably did not say, "I want to come home." A response more consistent with his personality would have been, "I'm fine. I can handle it. I'm doing well there." That was exactly what Fred wanted to hear. To the father, the son had finally learned to tolerate pressure. But the real question is, did military school truly change Donald Trump, or did it simply make his original personality more effective? Before military school, he may have thought, "How do I stop other people from controlling me?" After military school, he may have begun thinking, "How do I place myself in a position where I can control others?" Before military school, he gained a sense of power by opposing authority. After military school, he may have realized that the best strategy was not always to stand against authority. Sometimes the better strategy was to become the authority. Fred hoped to teach his son obedience, but Donald may have absorbed a deeper lesson. Obedience is not the destination. It is only one stage on the road to command. Discipline is not meant to make you ordinary. It is meant to give you the strength to defeat others. Rules are not always permanent. If you rise high enough, one day you may help determine what the rules are. Now, look again at the Donald Trump of today. Why does he enjoy large rallies so much? Why does he care so deeply about slogans, crowds, loyalty, and visible victory? Why does he rarely admit defeat in a calm, conventional way? Why does he emphasize fighting back whenever he is attacked? Why is he unwilling to become merely one politician among many? Why must the entire political stage revolve around him? The answer cannot be reduced to one military school, his father's influence, his brother's fate, competition inside the family, the New York real estate world, television, and decades of business conflict all helped shape the later Trump. But the Academy may have strengthened one belief that remained with him. The world contains strong people and weak people. Some give orders, others receive them. If you do not want other people deciding your life, you must continue moving upward until one day you stand at the front of the formation. At military school, rank determined who shouted the command. In real estate, wealth determined who had leverage in negotiation. On television, the host decided who was fired. In politics, the president exercised the authority of the state. These worlds appear completely different, but for Trump, they may have followed the same logic. Never be satisfied with remaining the person whose life is arranged by others. We can now return to the question from the beginning. What did Donald Trump do at the age of 13? There may not have been one single, shocking event. He did not suddenly become a different person in one day. What happened was that a series of smaller events finally allowed his father to see a dangerous pattern. Trump's own story about hitting a teacher, repeatedly creating trouble, enjoying the act of testing people, traveling to Manhattan without permission, the biographical accounts involving knives, his refusal to easily admit fault when confronted. Each incident, taken alone, could be dismissed as adolescent rebellion, but taken together, Fred may have seen an emerging personality. The boy was not afraid of conflict. He did not easily accept defeat. He did not want other people defining him, and when someone told him no, he was not likely to stop automatically. Fred was not afraid that Donald was too weak. He was afraid that Donald was too strong, but had not yet learned to control his own strength. He may not have feared that his son would grow up to become a failure. Quite the opposite. He may have seen enormous energy in him, but he could not know whether that energy would eventually become ambition, power, and success, or recklessness, chaos, and self-destruction. So he sent his son to military school. He hoped discipline would control impulse. He hoped hierarchy would restrain ambition. He hoped training would consume excess energy. He hoped honor would replace mischief. He hoped a stronger authority would teach the boy how to obey. But only half of that plan was completed. Military school made Trump more disciplined. It did not make him gentle. It taught him rules. It did not stop him from challenging rules. It forced him to accept orders, but it also showed him how attractive the position of giving orders could be. His father wanted to dull the edge of his son's personality. Military school may instead have sharpened the blade. Now, let's go back to the question we asked at the very beginning. What really happened to Donald Trump when he was 13 years old? At first glance, the answer seems simple. He got into trouble at school. He challenged his teachers. He secretly traveled into Manhattan. And according to several biographies, his father even discovered that he had been collecting knives. So, Fred Trump made a decision. His son had to be sent away to military school. But if the story were really that simple, it wouldn't be worth spending 30 minutes talking about it. Because what truly worried Fred Trump wasn't one bad incident. It wasn't one knife. It wasn't one argument with a teacher. It was something much deeper. He was beginning to see a personality taking shape. A boy who wasn't afraid of conflict. A boy who rarely admitted he was wrong. A boy who refused to let other people define his limits. When a teacher said no, Donald wanted to know, how serious is that no? When his father said, that's enough, Donald wanted to know, what happens if I take just one more step? Fred Trump wasn't looking at an ordinary rebellious teenager anymore. He was looking at a boy who had started testing authority itself. And that's a dangerous personality, not because it's weak, but because it's powerful. If a child like that lacks talent, he may simply spend his life getting into trouble. But if he also possesses intelligence, courage, ambition, and an almost obsessive desire to win, then the story changes completely. A personality like that, if left unchecked, can destroy a life. But if it's disciplined, guided, and placed inside the right competitive environment, it can become an extraordinary force. That was what Fred Trump was really trying to do. He wasn't trying to erase his son's ambition. He wasn't trying to turn Donald into a quiet, obedient boy, because in Fred Trump's world, obedience alone never created success. What he wanted was to put discipline around his son's strength, to give direction to his ambition, to teach him that being tough is not the same as being reckless, that competition is not the same as chaos, and that before you can command others, you must first learn how to obey. So, 13-year-old Donald Trump was sent to the New York Military Academy. At first, it looked like Fred's plan had worked. Donald adapted. He embraced discipline. He excelled in athletics. He climbed through the academy's strict chain of command. He wasn't broken. He wasn't turned into a quiet follower. Instead, he discovered something else. He realized that even in the strictest system, there was still a path to the top. If you were strong enough, good enough, disciplined enough, you could rise. You could go from taking orders to giving them. Perhaps that was the most important lesson military school ever gave Donald Trump. It didn't destroy his ambition. It taught him how to use it. It didn't remove his edge. It taught him when to hide it and when to sharpen it. It didn't stop him from challenging authority. It taught him something even more valuable. The smartest way to defeat authority isn't always to fight it. Sometimes it's to become it. So, Fred Trump succeeded, and he failed. He taught his son discipline, but he never taught him to be satisfied with following. He taught him the rules, but he also showed him how much power belongs to the people standing at the very top of those rules. From that moment on, much of Donald Trump's life followed the same direction. In real estate, he refused to remain in his father's world. He wanted Manhattan. He wanted his own name on the skyline. On television, he didn't want to be another businessman. He wanted to be the man deciding who stayed and who was fired. And in politics, he refused to play by the traditional rules. He challenged institutions. He challenged expectations. He challenged limits again and again and again. Can all of that be explained by what happened when he was 13? Of course not. But that year may have revealed something incredibly important. Donald Trump learned one lesson very early in life. If you don't want your future decided by other people, you have to keep climbing until one day you're the one making the decisions. So what really happened when Donald Trump was 13 wasn't simply a school transfer. It was a father trying to control his son's power, and a son who learned how to use that power instead. Fred Trump sent him away, hoping military school would keep him from destroying himself. Instead, it helped shape a Donald Trump who understood competition, hierarchy, loyalty, and power better than ever before. Perhaps that was the earliest version of the Donald Trump the world would one day know. But even after military school, Donald still didn't understand how money, banks, and real power actually worked. That lesson would come years later when his business empire stood on the edge of collapse. His debts exploded. His empire began falling apart. Almost everyone believed Donald Trump was finished. And yet, something remarkable happened. The banks didn't immediately destroy him. Some of them continued negotiating. Some continued extending credit. Some continued giving him time. Why? Why would banks continue betting on a man who appeared to have lost everything? Why did they believe keeping Donald Trump alive was more valuable than watching him fail? Perhaps that was the most important lesson of his entire life. Next time, we'll answer that question. Donald Trump, why did the banks refuse to let him go bankrupt? Thank you for watching. See you next time.